Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emanuel, I'm an Airbus pilot, and welcome to the next tutorial on the iniBuilds Airbus A350. We've just completed the before start checklist down to the line after our takeoff briefing, and we are now going to prepare our aircraft for pushback, start the engines, and then prepare our aircraft for taxi. So let's get right into it. At this point, we basically are done with everything we need to do. So now we're just waiting for boarding to complete, and by the time boarding has completed, for the doors to close. When that happens, normally we're also going to get the final load sheet, and when you get that, you once again cross-check your zero fuel weight and your center of gravity, and you cross-check that those are actually correctly inserted on the fuel and load page. Finally, you check that you have sufficient extra fuel on board, and you check that the THS value, so that's on the performance, the trimmable horizontal stabilizer, and the growth weight CG entered over here agree with the load sheet within plus or minus 1%. Then you check that you have sufficient fuel on board, so 21.8 down here. And with those checks completed, you go into the takeoff performance once again. I recommend to update the weather over here to be sure that you have the latest available. Just hit compute again so that you have the latest takeoff data, and if there are any changes, hit send to FMS, and then you can just accept that over here again. Today there were no changes, but sometimes this does happen depending on how long the pre-flight takes, if any front moves through, depending on the circumstances. Now, when that is done, we are basically ready to prepare our aircraft for the pushback. The first step is to disconnect any external power. And for that, we always disconnect external power 1 first and external power 2 second. Make sure that both are no longer turned on, so that you only see the avail light and not the auto light. And when that is the case, you can remove them through the OAS on the ground tab over here by deselecting the GPU down here. Verify that your parking brake is set, which you can see right down here, and then you can also remove your chocks. When all the doors are closed, you're going to hit the toggle slide arming in order to arm your slides, which you then confirm on your ECAM door page down here by verifying the slide indication showing down here. Now, when all of that is done, we are basically ready to commence our engine start. So let's get into it. Now, once we're ready for the pushback, we are going to carry out the before start procedure. And the before start procedure has us check the beacon, which we're going to turn on. Next, we are going to check that the surveillance page is set to default settings. So we hit the default setting button, click confirm, and that turns on the transponder in all the correct modes, and also the TCAS, which is already automatically turned on down here. So just hit default settings, and you are meant to do that on both sides. So both CM1 and CM2 will set that, and thereafter you go back to flight plan on the pilot monitoring side and performance on the pilot flying side. When that is done, we can call for the before start checklist below the line. So hit the checklist menu, and then we're going to check doors, closed, park and brake, set, and that's the checklist complete, and a short while after it will automatically close, as you can see over here. Well, and with that we are ready for our engine start. But first, let's go ahead and start the pushback. I do recommend to set the taxi chart on the OAS at this point. You can also go into the ANF, Airport Navigation Function, down here, and then we can communicate with the ground crew. To do that, we have to hit the interphone button for our transmit buttons, and then we can call them up. So that would go something like this: cockpit to ground, go ahead. Please confirm all ground checks are completed and the aircraft is ready for pushback. That's confirmed. Roger, we are clear to push. Nose to the left, parking brake set. Now let's go ahead and select our pushback within GSX. That's going to be a nose left pushback, please. So facing north on Tango 5. Eventually they will tell us to release the parking brake. We do that, and we cross-check that it indeed goes out down here on the PFD. And only then we tell them brakes released. And then they will tell us, Roger, commencing pushback, stand by for engine start. Now, at this point, we are finally off block. If we take a look on the outside, you can see that basically behind every stand, on every airport in the world, you will eventually find a line that marks the stand area. As long as you're within that stand area, you don't want to start the engines, because equipment might be nearby, damages could be caused. So always wait until you're clear of that area before commencing the engine start. And here we go, now we're clear, so let's go ahead and start the engines. The start sequence is always first 1, then 2. So in order to start the engine, ensure that APU bleed is on, and then we can move down here, engine start selector to ignition start, and now we've got to hit the timer, and after everything turns green, we got to wait for 10 seconds. The reason for this is that otherwise dispatch messages may be generated that might cause any nonsense alerts. So 10 seconds are over, and now engine start lever on for engine number 1, and that initiates the engine start sequence. So the engine start is pretty much completely automatic, with one exception. We need ignition within 40 seconds from the fuel flow turning on. So observe the fuel flow, and now within 40 seconds EGT needs to rise. That's the only one thing where we have to abort the engine start manually. In any other cases, your ECAM is going to handle it, even if you have a hung start, a hot start, whatever. Your FADECs are going to attempt to correct it, and if the engine can't be started, it will try that again. And if the engine can't be started again, you will get an ECAM alert telling you to put the engine master lever to off. Well, and that's engine number 1. And here we go. The avail light is showing, and once that shows, we can start engine number 2 by turning the master lever to the on position. Now our pushback is completed, so let's set our parking brake. Set the parking brake on over here, and confirming it down here before advising the ground operator that the parking brake has actually been set. So you always want to wait for the appropriate system response. While they're disconnecting ground equipment, check for the nose wheel steering disconnect memo to go away. Which might take a little while until they have disconnected the pin, but do keep an eye that this one is eventually going to be removed. So it looks like we have a good start on engine number 1. We can see the nose wheel steering disconnect memo is now gone. And now we're just waiting for the avail light to come on. And from the moment avail comes on, we basically need to keep the engines in idle for at least 30 seconds. So here we are. And we got to keep the engine in idle for at least 30 seconds. And that concludes our engine start. So next we do the after start flow, and we observe that the ground crew properly disconnects, and we want to see the clear signal from the ramp agent, and we want to see her holding a pin, so the nose wheel steering disconnect pin, in her hands. Alright, so now she's gone, so let's go ahead with the after start flow. For that, the pilot flying switches the engine start selector back to norm, and that initiates the flow. Then you go up to the overhead panel, you turn APU bleed off, set the engine and wing anti-ice as needed, and then you can turn the APU off. If you want to use APU bleed for takeoff, obviously you are gonna leave those on. Now, last but not least, you move down and check if there is anything in the ECAM status. If there would be anything, you would see STS showing down here, so you don't need to open the status page manually. Next, we're going to do the pilot monitoring part of the flow. That is down here. Arm the spoilers. Press the rudder trim reset button. And then you're going to set the flaps to the takeoff position. After that, move up, check for any status indication, and then we move to the primary flight display again, and down here we check that the auto trim has set our takeoff trim within 1% of the calculated value on the right hand side. So anything from 29.9 to 31.9 would be acceptable over here. As we can see, it's set 31.0, which is pretty good. Now, after that is complete, we are eventually going to do the after start checklist as soon as we have received the all clear signal from the ramp agent. So we have already received that signal, so let's go to the after start checklist, and that's engine anti-ice, or rather anti-ice. We don't see any anti-ice indications over here, we haven't selected it, so off. After start checklist complete. And this concludes the after start procedure, and with that, this tutorial. Thank you very much for watching. I sure hope that you learned something today. Leave your feedback in the comments underneath the video. I'm really looking forward to it. As always, like, comment and subscribe, and if you really love what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm looking forward to see you all again on the next one.